Direct and indirect speech. In this module, you will learn the usage of direct and indirect speech. Reporting speech. What someone has said, that is speech, can be reported in two ways, direct and indirect. Direct speech is speech that is directly reported, word for word, without any changes. It appears within double quotes. Example, the teacher said, "I've been teaching English for the last 10 years. Indirect speech is a form of third-person narration presented with some grammatical modifications and not word for word. It does not appear within double quotes. Example, the teacher said she had been teaching English for the last 10 years. John said, "I'm cycling for over an hour." John said he was cycling for over an hour. Change in modal verbs. Modal verbs in direct speech sometimes change when used in indirect speech. Will changes to would, can changes to could, may changes to might, shall changes to should, must changes to had to. But could, would, should, might and ought to in direct speech does not change when used in indirect speech. Present tense in indirect speech. The present tense can be used in indirect speech to say that something is still true, talk about a future event. Example, he said, "My name is Sam." He said, "His name is Sam." Change in time. An expression of time in direct speech must be changed to fit in with the time of reporting. Here's a table showing how the expressions of time change if reported on a different day. "Today's breakfast is mouth-watering," she said. She said, "Yesterday's breakfast was mouth-watering." Reporting verbs in indirect speech. The common reporting verbs in indirect speech are said, told, and asked. Said is used without an object. Example, he said he would fail in the test. Told is used with an object. Example, Bob told Harry he felt tired. Asked is used to report questions. Example, I asked Andrew what he ate for lunch. Using that in indirect speech. That may or may not be used in indirect speech. Example, her mother said that she had baked a cake. Or, her mother said she had baked a cake. In this module, you have learned that speech can be reported in two ways, direct and indirect. In direct speech, there is no change in the verb tenses. However, in indirect speech, the verb tenses usually change. Modal verbs in direct speech sometimes change when used in indirect speech. The present tense can be used in indirect speech to say that something is still true, talk about a future event. An expression of time in direct speech must be changed to fit in with the time of reporting. The common reporting verbs in indirect speech are said, told, and asked. That may or may not be used in indirect speech.
How to report interrogative sentences in narration. When we report interrogative sentences, the reporting verb said changes to asked or inquired. We may also use words like wanted to know or wanted. We also use whether or if or the question word who, where, what, when, how, whose used in a sentence to begin the words of the speaker. Examples. The guide said to Sanjay, "Have you been on a Himalayan trek before?" So this is changed as the guide asked Sanjay or inquired whether he had been on a Himalayan trek before. Another example. My uncle said to Akshay, "How do you plan to deliver books to the remote corners of India?" My uncle wanted to know how Akshay planned to deliver books to the remote corners of India. Reporting imperative sentences. When we report imperative sentences, the reporting verb said changes to asked, requested, advised, ordered, or encouraged according to the tone of the sentence. Examples. Rajat said to the librarian, "Please let me keep the book for another week." it is changed as Rajesh requested the librarian to let him keep the book for another week. Mrs. Roy said to her students, "You could give saplings as return gifts on your birthdays." It is changed as Mrs. Roy encouraged her students to give saplings as return gifts on their birthdays. Reporting exclamatory sentences. When we report exclamatory sentences, reporting verb said changes to exclaimed, wished, or cried. We also add adverbs like happily, sadly, angrily, anxiously, or phrases like exclaimed with happiness after the reporting verb depending on the emotion that the sentence conveys. Examples. Pakki said, "Hooray, I came first in the exam." Pakki exclaimed joyfully that she had come first in the exam. Deepak exclaimed, "What a clever boy Ravi is." Deepak exclaimed that Ravi was a clever boy. Reporting a conversation. While reporting a dialogue, we should not use the reporting verbs said or told in every sentence. We should also use verbs like replied, added, asked, or informed. If the same person speaks many times, one after the other, we may not use the reporting verb after the first sentence. We can directly write the later sentences in indirect speech. Here is an example. Dr. Sen, how do you think a book van will help people? Sarita, a lot of people will have access to books. Dr. Sen, will one van be enough for your purpose? Sarita, perhaps not. However, right now I can afford to buy only one van. Dr. Sen, it's a wonderful idea. All the best in your endeavors. This is actually reported as Dr. Sen asked Sarita how she thought a book van would help people. Sarita replied that a lot of people would have access to books. Dr. Sen wondered whether one van would be enough for her purpose. Sarita agreed that one van would probably not be enough. However, she could afford to buy only one van at that moment. Dr. Sen remarked that it was a wonderful idea and he wished her all the best in her endeavors. Now here are some words how they get changed in indirect speech. So now becomes then, here becomes there, today that day, this morning that morning, yesterday the day before, tomorrow the next day, next week the following week, next month the following month, ago before, thus so, last night the night before, hence, thence, come, go, etc.